Hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, Inlaid Dovetails again. Well, recently on the show, I gave you a demonstration of how to do inlaid dovetails using the Leigh D4R Pro dovetail jig. And as I expected, I had quite a few emails and comments of people saying, yeah, that's great if you got that fancy jig, but you know what, not all of us have that jig. Okay, all right. Challenge accepted. Today we're going to do inlaid dovetails, but I'm going to show you guys how to do it by hand. No fancy jig required. And it all starts off with some 1/2 inch thick maple. Well, in order to do inlaid dovetails by hand, you need to first of all think about the thickness of your inlay. For me, I'm going to make mine 1/8 of an inch thick. So your accent board, in this case walnut, needs to be 1/8 of an inch thicker than what your main board of your project needs to be. So because of that, the main line that you will use to draw your dovetails will be the thickness of your accent board, in this case 5/8 of an inch. So we're going to start off with that with a line 5/8 of an inch down from the edge of the board here all the way along. So we now need to mark out for our tails on our 1/2 inch maple board. I'm going to be coming in from each side 1/4 of an inch, then 1 1/4, and then 2 inches. There we go. There's my starting marks for our dovetails. Now on the original, on the jig, I used an 8-degree cutter. In this case, I'm using a 9-degree marking gauge for dovetails. You do not need this to do this project. You can use a bevel gauge, you can mark them out by hand, you can sketch them roughly if you like. It doesn't have to be perfect. But there we go. We're going to mark our original tails. There we go. There's one side, and then we'll just mark the other side. There's 1, 2, and then we will mark the last one here. All right, and that is the layout now for our tails. Now I would suggest extending the tops of these lines over the top end of the board. The reason I say that is because it'll give you a good reference point for lining up your saw to get square cuts. All right, so let's start off with cutting these tails. So when thinking about these tails, you want to think about what section you want to have removed. So in this case, it will be this section here will go, this section here, this section here, and this little half one over here. There's a reason you need to think about that, and that is what side of the line you want your saw to ride on. So you want it to ride in the waist area. A lot of people try to cut exactly on the line. That's not going to work. You're not going to get a good joint. You want to cut on the outside of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to line this up using your thumb as a guide. Line it up on that outside edge, and we're just going to get it started. There, you can see that I just went just to the outside of that line. And now you carefully want to cut down along the dovetail line that you marked on your piece, using your index finger here along the spine of the saw for support. Now slow down when you get to the bottom, because you want to try to make it a nice clean ending on that line. There you go, there's one. Now on this one, don't forget, go into the waist area. So again, we're going to use our thumb for a guide, our finger on the spine of the saw, and we'll line it up just outside in the waist area and get it started. Again, follow that line as best you can all the way down. There's two. Okay, so I'm going to continue and cut all of the vertical lines here all the way across, and then I'll show you what to do next. Well, I have cut all of my lines here on the side, and we're just going to now cut our two end spaces for our half pins. So I've transferred our vertical line right here, our straight line, onto the side profile, 5/8 of an inch down from the top. And again, just like on our tails, you want to line up your blade on the waist area, not on the line. So for this one here, we're going to just line it up with the shoulder there. And then as carefully as you can, follow the vertical line down until you meet with your cut from your 9-degree dovetail. And it just pops right out. And now we will do the exact same thing on the other side. And there we go. Okay, so now we need to cut out our center sections. So for that, we're going to need a fret saw. So with the fret saw, you've already marked your waist areas here. So we're just going to bring it down inside the cut and somewhere close to the bottom. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we're going to start sawing and turning our saw at the same time, just like that. And now all you want to do is very carefully, you want to run your saw all the way through the line to remove this center part. Don't try to follow the line, guys. It's a very difficult thing to do. So just go above the line. We're going to clean it up afterwards. Down to the bottom, cut, turn, make sure that we're good at the back, and carefully now, and there we go. There's one. And then we'll do the same with the second waist area. So now it's time to clean these up. And for that, you're going to need a sharp chisel. Well, at this point now, I'm just going to score the bottom edge of the waist area of our tails. All you need to do is take your 1/2-inch chisel, make sure that it's sharp, and you want to line it up on that score line. You can take bites of it if you want, if you don't want to do it all in one shot. And we're just going to come in here and slowly nibble away at this until we get our flat bottom of our area for our pin to go in. So we're just going to work at it until we get it done. This chisel could use some sharpening. So I think I'm going to do that, and then I'll finish up trimming up these recesses here. Well, we have our tails cut, and what I'm doing here is I'm just clamping this walnut board, which is our inlay board, so that it is flush with our pin board. This way we can line things up and mark our pins without a problem. So what you want to do is line it up so that your shoulders of your joint match with the edge of your board. And once you're happy with that, you can hold it in place and then using a fine pencil, get in there and mark where all of these tails are. So with our marks for the pins done, we now need to mark on both sides of the board our depth of cut. And for that, it'll be the same thickness as our maple piece. In our case, it's 1/2 inch. And then at this point, you just need to transfer now the lines you've marked on the end. You need to transfer them to the ends of the board. So we'll just line it up and give it a mark. And we will do this all the way across on both sides of our piece. And now with that being done, we can clamp this up in our vise. We'll line it up with the saw in our waist area and then carefully get the blade started. And carefully cut down to our line at 1/2 inch. Just like that. And we will do that for each one of our pins, remembering to line up our blade in the waist area. Okay, and with that done, it is the same process as what we used before. We are going to use our fret saw to get in here, and we're going to cut close to the bottom line in all of our waist pieces. You just have to remember though, that when you're cutting these, as you're cutting, you want to start tilting your blade to match the angle on the other side. And I'll show you what I mean by that. We're just going to bring this down to the base of the cut, just above it. Start to cut, rotate it. Now, there we are. Now we're cutting at this angle. Can you see that? Now, as you're cutting, start rotating your saw to change the angle of the cut. I am now cutting at this angle. And we will just carefully bring it over to the edge of the pin mark, just like that. And you will do that in each one of these waist areas. And the same process again, we will score the back shoulder of these, and using our sharp chisel, we will chop out the back shoulder so that everything fits right. I don't think we need another video of me chopping that out, so I'll see you when I get it done, and then we'll do a test fit. Okay, so in testing the fit, it's a little tight for me, almost too tight. I risk snapping or splitting the walnut inlay board. So we're going to just fine tune this. Don't be afraid to get in there with a file and just trim it just a touch. You're not going to hurt anything. You're not cheating. You're still working by hand. Don't let anyone tell you any different. If you want, you can also get in there with your chisel and do a little bit of paring. You don't have to go crazy on it. You can just get on the edge and just take the slightest little trim off of it, just to get it to fit a little better. Just remember, guys, the business end of your chisel, your hands are never here. Your hands are always behind the chisel. I know that might sound silly to say, but I'm sure there are some of you out there that have got a trip to the ER because of it. So we'll just carefully pair these up, and once we get the fit fine-tuned and we're happy with it, then we'll put it together and I'll show you what I've got there so far. Okay, well, I've fine-tuned it using the chisel and a file, and I think, yes, okay, it's a tight joint. We've got a few little gaps there, but nothing that I'm going to be too concerned about. As far as a hand-done dovetail joint, especially one where contrasting woods will show every imperfection, I don't know. I think I did all right. So I'm pretty sure you guys know how to glue together a dovetail joint. Get it glued together and let it completely, and I mean completely, set up. Don't mess with it until it's 100% dry. Let it sit overnight. All right, so here it is the next day and the joint is dry. We now need to cut off our inlay board, but we need to cut it 1/8 of an inch wider than the thickness of our main maple board here. So we're going to cut this off over the table saw at 5/8 of an inch. And at this point you should have something that looks like this. So the next thing we need to do now is we need to mark out for our next cut. In other words, we need to mark the holes for our pins. So let's get this clamped in the vise and we can start up on that. Well, the very first thing that I've done is I have drawn a line 1/2 inch down from the top all the way across. That will represent the bottom of our cuts. It will also leave our 1/8 of an inch on our walnut. I've now placed a mark 1/8 of an inch out from each one of our angled cuts here. And I'm just going to use our dovetail gauge here, and we're going to mark all of our cuts for our next pins. Now, as well, just like we did on the first set, we will also transfer these marks onto the top of our piece to give us the ability to have a visual to get a good square cut. So I'll transfer all of these marks and then we can start cutting. Now the process for cutting these, I guess this would be the tails in this case, the process for cutting these is exactly the same. So I'm just going to run through it quickly, and you want to be careful here, that's all, because these pieces are fragile. All right, so let's get these cut, and again, we're just going to work with the handsaw. So using our thumb as a guide and keeping our blade in the waist area to the one side of our line, we'll just carefully cut these out. And again in the waist area. Okay, so I'm going to cut the rest of these and then we can move on to the next step. And now, just like we did the first time when we cut the tails, we will cut our shoulders here with the handsaw, just following the line here to make sure we get a nice square cut. Just like that, and then we'll flip it over and do the same on the opposite side. Okay, and just like we did with our original, we will now get in here with our fret saw and cut out our tail sections just close to our line, and then we're going to finish it off with the chisel. I don't really think we need a video of this. We've already done it once. It's the exact same process. So I'll see ya when I get the tails done. Okay, so there we go. Then we have those cut now. We're going to get a piece of maple here, and we're going to mark out our pins. If you remember when we did the initial set, we just laid this board down on top of the mating board to cut the pins on and just trace them out. And that's exactly what we're going to do here, the exact same process. Just like that. Now we're going to need to mark, just like we did before, the depth of cut. This time, the depth of cut is going to be 5/8 of an inch because it has to match the depth of our inlay piece. So we'll just place a mark at 5/8 of an inch all the way across our board. And again, just like we did before, we will now transfer these lines from each one of our dovetails vertically down along our board. Just like this. And again, I like to do it on both sides. So once you get these marked, we can start the cutting process. Well, this is pretty much a repeat performance of what we did with cutting the first pins when we cut them out of walnut. In fact, the process is identical. So we're going to mark our waist areas, which will be where the tails are here, and we're going to start cutting, keeping our blade again in on the side of the line where the waist is. That way you'll get a tighter fit. So we're going to do these ones here, the small little half pins first. There we go, down to the line, and then we will carry on all the way across, making sure, I can't stress enough to keep this blade on the inside of where your waist area is. Alright, so I'm going to finish off the rest of these cuts, and then we can get in there with the coping saw, just like we did before, and cut all of this off and get our pins cut. So I'm going to get all these pins cut, I'm going to get them chopped out with the chisel, and then we'll test our joint. Okay, and with that, we'll just do a test fitting here. See how we made out. Which way does this go? There we go. It's a little snug, but I think okay, you know what? I think that's acceptable. So we're going to glue this together now, and once we get it all glued in and it dries, we need to deal with this little 1/8 of an inch strip that's left on the inside when it comes to making these inlaid dovetails. So with that joint dried up, we still have this 1/8 by 1/8 piece of walnut from the inlay material left over. And we're just going to get in here with a flush cut saw, and we'll cut this out. And once we get it cut out from both surfaces, we can clean it up with a sharp chisel. And once you're done cleaning this up, all that's left to do is sand the joint. So I'm going to get that sanded up, and I'll show you what we ended up with. And there you have it. Hand-cut inlaid dovetails. Guys, when I demonstrated this with the Leigh D4R Pro jig, I received the comments of, yeah, all great if you have this hundreds of dollars worth of jigs. You don't need it. And the proof is right here. I am no professional hand-cut dovetail guy. I mean, I know how to do them, and I know how to get a successful joint. But I prefer the jig because of the perfection that it gives me. But yet, this just goes to show you that with a little bit of practice and knowing the little tricks sort of thing, you can get perfect joints, or close to it. At least one heck of a great representation of it, because this is beautiful. Now, What are the secrets to getting it? Number one, I've said it several times through the video, to make sure that you're cutting with your saw lined up on the right side of the line. Do not cut in the middle of that line. The kerf of your saw will make your joint loose and sloppy every single time. I don't care how good you are, it will make it sloppy. So always cut with the kerf in the waist area. You can still cut at that line, but make sure that your kerf is starting at the line in the waist area. That way you're getting the tightest joint possible without losing the material of the kerf of the blade. The other thing that you want to do is make sure, this is so important, make sure that your chisels are sharp. And when I started this project, I made the mistake of chopping with a dull chisel, and I paid for it with a tear out in my inlay, and that made it so that, of course, that sticks out like a sore thumb now. So you know what, that's live and learn. Make sure your chisels are like stupid sharp. Just make sure that they are crazy sharp, because when you're cutting that cross grain, it's going to go a long way to getting a nice clean cut and a nice clean edge. Now, this was just a demonstration, so I'm not that disappointed about it. But if this was a project that I had taken all of the time to get in there and do all of the processes to do inlaid dovetails, and because of something as foolish as a dull chisel, I wrecked my project or made an eyesore like this, I would be pretty upset about that. So there's the other thing you want to make sure that your chisels are razor sharp. It's so important when you're cutting dovetails. Guys, another key to success here is take your time. I can't stress it enough. Don't rush this project. Working with hand tools is an absolute blast, and it really screams skill when you get it. And one of the main things about getting it is taking your time and doing it slowly. Don't rush trying to cut through that dovetail like there's no tomorrow. When you're getting closer to the line, slow down. Make sure you're not crooked. Make sure you're not overcutting on one side, undercutting on the other. It's important to try to keep that saw straight at all times while you're cutting. Even if you're cutting on an angle like this for the tails, you still want to keep it straight this way. That way you're getting a nice square even cut. Use those 3 little tips and you will have some serious success with this stuff. And of course, practice. Practice always makes perfect. So how does it compare to a jig done dovetail that I did on the show previously? Well, check this out. Check this out. Mine is here on the right. The hand done one. The one that was done with the jig for the show is on the left. Guys, they're both beautiful. They're both gorgeous. The one on the right has imperfections because it was done by hand. I'm not a machine. I don't have that repeatability and that ability of perfection every time as long as the setup is right. You get different movements of your arm. You get different movements of your chisel. You get different hammering. You end up with small imperfections, but good gosh, look at the joint. It's spectacular. They're both beautiful, and I would be proud to have either one of these in a project that I put on display. Guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I really want to thank those of you that made the comments about the jig, and I got a couple emails about it as well. I want to thank you for sending those, because what it did was it gave me the opportunity. I don't take any offense to stuff like that. It gave me the opportunity to step up to the plate, put my money where my mouth was, and show you don't need the fancy equipment to do the kind of stuff I do here on the show. All you need is some patience, some sharp tools, and a handsaw, and you can whip this off like guys. So I want to thank you for sending those comments in and pushing me to produce today's show. If you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We have a ton of fun here every Tuesday and Friday. I honestly hope that you're going to consider becoming a part of that. While you're at it, click the bell and then you won't miss the notifications of the future episodes of the program. Guys, I hope that you've enjoyed today's content. I hope that this has shown you that you don't need fancy equipment to be a good woodworker. I hope you're going to try this for yourself, because it really is a beautiful joint. And more importantly, I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video.